Good evening, listeners. My name is Priscilla Phantom, and welcome to the third episode of the Phantom Myth, brought to you by WWT radio station. I'm sure you, like me, have witnessed the strange weather we are getting recently. After all, it's been going on for 2 days now. As I peer out of my studio window, I can see the dark pools on the ground, which shine crimson under the street lights. Droplets of dark, deep red are quietly beating against the window pane right now. My formerly yellow woolen coat, which was a Christmas present from Aunt Carol, is now soaked through. It was dyed a deep red for my walk here, and even after washing it in the station sink, it remained that deep red, which I think I might actually prefer to the original colour. Sorry, Aunt Carol. What I'm telling you is that I do not and cannot deny that this weather is strange. This is most certainly not normal rain. However, I believe this is no cause for panic. We have a letter here from Arthur Smith, who claims to know the origins of the red rain. He, for the people who might not know, is the man who is often found standing in front of the bench at the Belladonna Park. In his letter, he proclaims that the end is nigh, as he has done every day for the past 13 years. For the record, I did not want to read this letter out, but I was told by my producers that I had to. So, this is Arthur Smith's account of the weather. Dear cruel radio lady, I know you won't believe me, and I doubt you or your stuffy network will give me the time of day, but I know things. I know why blood falls from the sky. I know what goes on in this town, even what happens in the basement of what used to be Milton's music shop over the last month. I saw them. About a dozen people in pale yellow cloaks with an ornate dagger embroidered on the back. I know other people have seen them too, but nobody seems to remember, or they don't notice. That's what people do in this town. They turn blind eyes upon anything that they do not wish to see, upon anything that does not fit their view of what this island is, what their idea of normal is. I had seen them skulking in the shadows a few times with their hoods pulled down low so their faces couldn't be seen. I knew they were up to something, so I would watch them every night, 5 minutes to midnight. Exactly 5 minutes to midnight every single time. A pale blue cloak would hang off the shoulders of the figure leading the group, rather than the washed-out, insipid yellow ones of his followers. Whoever the leader was, they were a tall, slim figure, graceful. Rather than walking, he would glide along with inhumane smoothness. There was what I can only describe as an otherness to them. This person would unlock the door, and the others would file in after. I would wait outside, and each time they would leave precisely at 12:30. Exactly 35 minutes after they entered the building. They would silently file out one after the other, much the same way that they had entered the building. Except there would always be one less figure. The first time, 20 of them went in and 19 left. The second, 19 went in, but only 18 left. I continued to watch the group every night, and the numbers never grew. They only dwindled. Last Sunday night, it was different, however. By that time, the only ones left were the figure in the blue cloak and one pale yellow-cloaked person. They entered the building at exactly 11:55, as always. I sat and I waited for the blue-cloaked person to lock the door after them, but he never did. I waited a few moments until I had built up the courage and wandered over, pressed the handle down. It relented, and the door swung open to reveal an empty room. I stepped into a room that had almost been completely stripped. It was only the scratched and faded sign reading Milton's music, which still hung on the wall at the other end of the room, that provided any clues as to what the place might have looked in its heyday. Loose wires hung from the holes that had been smashed through the plaster. Large industrial lights with broken bulbs swung from ceiling on thin wires. Next to the old Milton music sign was a wooden door, with small chips of its green gloss paint still clinging to it. And upon this door was a small metal plaque with the word staff etched into it. I crept over to the door and placed my ear against it. But from behind it, I could hear nothing. I strained to listen, but there was only silence. I pressed the door, and it squealed on its hinges as it opened, revealing a dark, descending staircase. The steps had been carved from some type of smooth stone, and they twisted to the right, so I couldn't see where they led. The walls had been built out of the same type of stone, which looked entirely out of place in an old music shop with its brick walls and carpeted floors. Now, I know what happens to people who follow cultists and wander into basements, so it was clearly a bad idea to go down those stairs. But I had come so far. I wanted to know. I needed to know. I needed to see with my own two eyes. You may think I'm stupid, but I defy you, given my predicament and curiosity, to do anything else. What else have I to live for anyway? Nobody listens to my warnings. But I was right. I am right. I swear it. So, I went down the stairs. I followed the steps down, deeper into the rabbit hole. The stairs twisted lower and lower until I could barely see. There were no lights to guide my way, and I thought about going back. But I know I never would. Even knowing what I know now, I would never, could never, choose any other option. Eventually, it became so dark that I had to cling onto the walls for support. Yet I kept descending. Further and further I wandered. Deeper and deeper down I went. Darker and darker it became. In this darkness, this absolute absence of light, I lost my way, and I lost myself. After a while, I was no longer certain the staircase twisted to the right, or whether I was still descending. Time meant nothing in the void that I had found myself in. I lived a life, 10 lives, 100 in each second of that nothingness. I was nothing. I am nothing. The silent darkness. I was at peace for the first time, no longer feeling tethered to my body. Then I heard something, a voice, quiet and distant, but it utterly shattered my mind, and I fell through the eternity, and I eventually found myself once again in a body, and I realized I could see the outline of the steps, and then I could see where each stone in the wall was. The further I wandered, the more I could see. I was still descending the stairs. I looked down and was somewhat surprised to find I was still myself, unchanged. I no longer felt myself. I no longer craved the light, but I continued on, even as the light grew brighter and brighter. The stairs twisted into shapes that I am sure, by any and all laws of physics, should overlap, but there was only ever one path. As I got closer, the better I could hear them, and I was certain there was at least 2 voices. Both men. They sounded as if they were singing, or chanting, maybe. Then abruptly, the infinite ended. As I turned a corner, I saw an archway instead of more steps. It was an old Georgian archway, rounded at the top, and it had clearly been meticulously and regularly cleaned and maintained. The inscription upon this archway were the words, Acta Dios numquam mortalia fallunt. Now I had no real idea what this said or even which language it was in, but in the back of my mind, something told me that mort meant death. I didn't hold out hope the message to be a pleasant one. Regardless, I kept creeping down the last few steps, clinging to the walls. Something about the archway before me and the brightness of the light from beyond it brought me out in a cold sweat. I did not feel like myself in the dull yellow light which emanated from the room before me. I wanted to crawl back to the darkness. There, I was nothing rather than a man who wore skin that no longer belonged to him. However, I knew I couldn't go back, or even just stay where I was. I had to keep going forward. I had to know what this place was. So I peered into the room. There was an empty cavern with bare stone walls, lit by hundreds of candles scattered over the floor, leaving only a thin path from the stairs into the centre of the room, where the figure in the pale blue cloak and the figure in the insipid yellow cloak sat cross-legged on the floor. Between them lay a mound of red fabric. They were both chanting, their deep, masculine voices echoing around the room. I couldn't make out the words, but something told me I wouldn't recognize them if I could. Hypnotized, I watched on as they both just sat there chanting perfectly in time, their heads down, their hands folded on the laps before them. This was the first time that I had ever seen the skin of one of those figures. The one in the pale blue cloak had wrinkled skin and long yellow fingernails. The yellow-cloaked man had bony grey hands that seemed to be turning a lifeless shade of blue. The blue-cloaked figure's voice seemed to be growing stronger. I could barely hear the yellow-cloaked figure's voice at all now, under the booming echo of the blue-cloaked man. Eventually, I found I could not hear the yellow-cloaked man at all. He slumped further and further forward until eventually he collapsed. He did not get up. He did not move. He was not breathing. And I did nothing. I simply stood there watching on. The man in the pale blue cloak didn't respond to the other man's collapse. Instead, he continued chanting, his voice getting stronger with each word. I could hear each syllable clearly now. I was certain it was not a human language. His voice reverberated throughout the room, ringing in my ears as he repeated the final phrase over and over and over until it was forged, forever lodged in my memory. Superior Forvia Domiesse. And the red pile of fabric between the blue-cloaked man and the dead man sat up. Something wore that cloak and it was alive, but I promise you, it wasn't human. Whatever it was had its back to me, and I was thankful. I wouldn't want it to see me, and I don't think I would have liked to have seen its face. Although from this angle I could see that the same intricate dagger pattern had been embroidered on the back of the red robe. I don't know exactly what I had witnessed, and I suppose I'm still not sure. But I thought that I had better leave. It seems as if some unholy ceremony was almost over. I wanted to back away. I tried to peel my eyes from the scene in front of me, but I couldn't. I don't know if I was frozen in terror or if some morbid curiosity kept me in that place. But I did nothing as the thing in the red robe uncurled its mangled body from the floor. It twisted and bent in ways that a body should not be able to twist and bend. It stretched up to the ceiling, the robe hanging off its spindly frame. The man in the blue robe stumbled back, staring up at the beast. His hood was still pulled down so low, but I could imagine that his expression was one of abject horror. The thing loomed over the cloaked man, its skeletal hands reaching down. It was then that I realized the candles were going out, one after the other, until there was only one left to illuminate that thing wrapping its long fingers around the body of the cloaked man. The last candle died with a scream. Something inside me snapped. I think that was the first time I really comprehended what I was actually seeing. It was actually happening in front of me. So I turned and crept back up the stairs through the darkness. There was only ever one way to go, and still I was uncertain whether I was going up or down or which way the steps were bending. My heart thumped in my chest as I wheezed each breath in and out. I lost my way, but I did not lose myself. I felt more myself than I had since I entered the shop front above. However, I could not stop my mind from wandering into the darkness around me. I imagined that thing, that monster was right behind me, and with every step I was just about to escape its long, bony fingers, which would curl around thin air rather than my arm or my leg or my throat. And that at any point I could trip and that thing would be upon me, and it would drag me down further into the darkness, so I would lose myself forever. Even as each breath in and out began to tear my throat, and my legs ached a dull, numb ache, and I thought I was going to faint, I made myself run up those stairs. Eventually, it began to grow light again. I looked behind me to check to see if the beast was there, and I found nothing. And I looked at myself to be sure I was myself, and I found that I was. I slowed down to a walk, but breathing heavily against musty air. I kept going at this slow pace, certain I was now safe until I saw the door, still standing open, exactly as I had left it open at the top of the stairs. I wandered through the hollow shell of Milton's music shop in a daze, unsure of myself or my sanity. I made my way over to the door and pushed my way into the cool air. I embraced the cold, for I knew that it, at least, was real. Once I was back onto the street, I peered through a small hole in the chipboard which covered the window of the music shop. I don't know why I did. Maybe I was hoping to see what I did, to confirm that I wasn't going insane. In the centre of the shop, the beast stood, hunched over so it could fit in the small room. It was looking at me, and it smiled. My blood ran cold. It had let me go. Why? I couldn't tell you. I can tell you that I turned and ran from that shop, and I didn't stop running until I reached the docks. No ferries were running at this time of the morning, and I don't have any money anyway. I thought about swimming it, but something about being enveloped by the darkness scared me more than drowning. The rain started later that day, and it hasn't stopped raining yet. Maybe it will by the time you read this, if you bother to, of course. The Bible tells us that rain is God's blessing, but this rain is no blessing. It's his blood. He has been wounded by this cult. This is a plague and a curse upon our island. We may be left alone in this world, so embrace your loved ones and get your affairs in order. The rapture is soon upon us. The end is nigh. Okay, just to remind you that this rather disturbing account of an esoteric cult affecting our small island has come from Arthur Smith, a man who has taken to warning the public about their impending doom by yelling it in the park since 2009. Now, where to start to unravel this thread? I want to point out that there have been many incidences of blood rain, which have all turned out to be a high concentration of red pigment, often from sand, which is blown in from somewhere and mixed with the rain. It is a rare occurrence, but, and I can't stress this enough, it is not blood rain. And it is certainly not brought on by God's wrath or pain due to a cult of cloaked figures that nobody else has ever reported seeing. Also, the words on the arch and the phrase uttered by the blue-cloaked figure are both in Latin, and is very much a human language, despite his certainty that it was not. The archway translates as mortal deeds never deceive the gods, and the blue-cloaked figure would have said, "Crawl out of the pit, you are home." That is, if he said this at all, which is highly doubtful. Another thing that he mentioned is that Milton's music shop had been closed for a month. But as many of you listeners have likely noticed, Milton's music shop has been closed for over 2 years now. Also, both me and my intern Harvey visited the music shop to find it empty, as Arthur described. We found the door, but it had been bricked up, and it looked like it had been that way for at least a year. Arthur could not have possibly have seen what he claims to have seen, especially not as recently as he claims. It sounds like Arthur Smith, who, I have to say, is a somewhat unreliable narrator, started a story, made it up as he went along, then had an existential crisis and just ran with it before looping back to his usual "the end is nigh" spiel. Nobody else seems to have seen those figures, nor the red-robed creature. There have not been any unexplained disappearances reported in the last month, unless you count the fictitious Eric Amstein from my first episode. So I'm left with the sneaking suspicion that this was a fantastical story. And as I look out of my window, I can see that it seems to have stopped raining. If that's not a good omen, then I don't know what is. There is nothing supernatural in this darkness, and the rain is most certainly not a harbinger of the end of time, nor anything else. I hope this brings you some comfort in the dead of night when you're laying in bed and the house creaks in the wind. Sleep well, dear listeners.
The voice of Priscilla Phantom was Lynsey Evans. I hope you enjoyed listening to our podcast. Thank you for enjoying it. Hang on, wait, that wasn't right. Have a brilliant day. If you did enjoy this episode, and most importantly, if you can afford to, you can send donations to the Phantom Myth PayPal page. There should be a link in the description. Thank you.